Shabbat Shalom, my friends. Shabbat Shalom to all of my spiritual brothers and sisters in our Lord and Savior, Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Christ. Shabbat Shalom to each and every one of you on YeHoVaH our Father's Sabbath day. Peace to you on the Sabbath day, the seventh day of the week. Thank you so much for watching. You are watching the Sword of YeHoVaH Ministries, where we are all about that sword of our Father, the Word of God. That sword, according to Hebrews 4, verse 12, which is living and active, sharper than any double-edged sword, unto the dividing asunder of both joints and marrow, body and spirit, and is a discerner of the thoughts, the intents of the human heart and mind. That is the Word of God, the written Word, His written Word, recorded Word, which is the iron rod, which if we cling to it, if we hold fast to it, and we never let go of it, and we're always feasting upon it, we're always striving to understand it, it is that Word which can guide and direct us through all of the lies and confusion of this world, through the mists of darkness, which leads to the tree of life. And that's the first form of the Word of God. And of course we have the second form, the living form, as John records in the first chapter of his Gospel, John chapter 1. He says that the Word in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with the God, YeHoVaH, and the Word was a God. And he goes on and he explains that the Word became flesh and tabernacled with us. Yeshua, the Malach of YeHoVaH, the messenger of YeHoVaH's presence 2,000 years ago, came down to this world to minister to us, to walk that path of perfect obedience to the law of God, to the Torah, to show us the path that we need to follow, that we need to walk. We should strive each and every day of our lives to follow in His footsteps, in the footsteps of Yeshua. But because we all sin, but because we all fall short of the glory of God, Yeshua had to fulfill the law, as in He had to pleru it, fill it up to its fullest measure and potential, and then take upon Himself the punishment for our crimes, the things that we have done. We have transgressed the law. We have broken God's law. We have sinned against our Father. But Yeshua comes in as that. The word is a propitiation. He is the worthy sacrifice, the paschal lamb sacrifice that takes away the sins of the world. And for all of those who are willing to repent, to turn from their wicked ways and turn back to the true worship of our Father, and declare to the Father that we want to live in faith and obedience to His Son Yeshua, then our sins can be completely and totally forgiven. The slate can be wiped clean. And as many times as we fall down, as long as we're willing to get back up on our feet, our Father YeHoVaH, His grace, His mercy, His forgiveness, and the mercy of our Lord Yeshua, it's there. It's there to kafar, to atone, to cover us with their righteousness, so that we may have the ability to return into the presence of that perfect God wherein in His presence no unclean thing can dwell. That's what the Scriptures teach. No unclean thing can dwell in the presence of our Father. So through Yeshua and His sacrifice, His atonement, as long as we are willing to do our part, as long as we are willing to shema, listen and obey to their words and to their voice, we can be totally covered. We can be that bride, according to Revelation 19, chapter 19. The record states that the wife of the bridegroom, the bride, has made herself ready. She has made herself ready, and it was given to her clean and bright linen clothing that covers her. And the linen is, the clean and bright clothing is the righteous acts, the righteous actions of the saints of God. As long as we are willing to shema to their voice, to follow in the footsteps of Yeshua, to strive to each and every day, guess what? God's mercy is there. His forgiveness is there. His grace is there. The atonement of Yeshua is there to cover us, to protect us, and to save us. Through Yeshua, by the power of the Father, we can be saved, and we can be raised up to have a crown of righteousness placed upon our own heads, that we might sit upon a throne of righteousness. That with Yeshua and with our Father YeHoVaH, we have the incredible blessing and opportunity, that greatest gift that's offered from our Father, the gift of eternal life. We have that opportunity to rule and reign in the house of Israel forever. And it all comes back to the word of our Father. Again, the written word and the living word. That's what it's all about, my friends. It's about listening and obeying. It's about shema to the word. So that is what we're all about with this ministry, and that's what we seek to do. So I'm just so grateful that you're here. I'm so grateful that you're watching. And I have to say, I just want to inform all of you with what's been going on in this last week. Actually, it's about the last 8, maybe even 10 days. You might be hearing that my voice is a little bit scratchy. It's a little bit scratchy right now, and it's simply because about 8 to 10 days ago, starting with my second oldest daughter, Elora, she came down with something nasty, and what's really interesting is that it didn't really affect her all that much. She got sick, she was sick for a couple days, and it went away, and it didn't seem all that bad. But during those 2 or 3 days that she was sick, my wife Della, she caught whatever Elora had, and it had a totally different effect on my wife Della. Della, who really doesn't get sick all that often. Maybe she only gets sick, once every 2 years. She, this last week, these last about 7 days, has just had one of the worst weeks ever. She's just been absolutely, practically laid out with this sickness. And I get sick more often than my wife does. I get sick on average about twice a year. This last week I was just counting my blessings, and I was like, well, I'm so sorry to see that my wife is going through this horrible sickness, but at least I'm counting my blessings that, I haven't caught it. But then, of course, I wake up this morning, just this morning, and then there was that feeling in your throat, in the back of your throat, where you just know there's a problem. And then came the slight cough, and my lungs just fired up, and I could feel the inflammation and the fire in my lungs. And throughout the day, my throat has just gotten worse and worse, and my voice is starting to give out a little bit on me. So, but I have to praise my God and my Father for His mercy, because here we had a situation where for the past week, my wife was, really, really sick with, whatever this thing was, and I was okay, I was fine. But then just as my wife is coming out of it, she's on the mend, she's getting better, I'm now going into it. So, all last week, I'm okay, I can take care of things, she's, sick, but now, she's coming out of it and I'm getting sick. So, all I ask, my dear brothers and sisters, is that you be patient with me, and I also ask for your faith and your prayers to be with me, because here I am, and I desire to fulfill my calling that YeHoVaH, my Father, and my Lord Yeshua, they've called me to this work. They've called me to teach and preach their word, the word of truth, to you, and I'm striving to do that each and every week. But now that I'm just getting into this sickness throughout the day, again, my voice has just been getting worse and worse, and the scratchiness and the throat is starting to really hurt and to burn. But I really just pray to my Father that I will have His strength to be with me, that over the next 2 hours a message of truth, His message, His word, His message of truth might be faithfully delivered to you, that He will sustain me physically and give me the strength to deliver His word to you. So just patience, my friends, and but again, if you are sound, if you do hear a little bit of that hoarse voice and a little bit of the scratchiness, that would be the reason why. So Dell is coming out of it, I'm getting into it, but the work must go on, the work of our Father. So thank you again for watching. We are going to be continuing today in Jeremiah chapter 9. We're going to be picking up in verse 12. We're going to finish chapter 9, also verse 12 to 26. And then we're going to go into the first 5 verses of chapter 10. So 9, 12 through 26, and then 10, 1 through 5. A lot to cover today, and some pretty fascinating subjects. We are going to be talking about, this is chapter 10 verses 1 through 5, we are going to be discussing the subject of the Christmas tree. So if you would like some context, if you have forgotten a few of the previous video messages that we've done, particularly the subject of Asherah poles, I would invite you, I'd recommend that you go back and you watch our first video that we did for the book of Jeremiah. It's Intro to Jeremiah. It's all about the context. The very first Jeremiah teaching video that we did, where we talked a lot about Asherah poles or obelisks. They can be made from many different kinds of materials. They can be made from stone in the form of an obelisk. They can be made of wood, where they're just a tree that's been cut down and shaped and carved into this vertical shaft. They can be made of wood, but they can be plated or covered in some type of metal, whether it's bronze or silver or gold. These they're called Asherah poles, and they go back to ancient Babylon. They go back 4,000 years ago to the time of the Tower of Babel, with the king and queen of the Tower of Babel, or at least that land, that area, was called the land of Shinar. And the king and queen, they were Nimrod and Semiramis. And as the records state, Nimrod was killed in battle. Very likely it was Shem, the son of Noah, righteous son of Noah, who also most likely was the same Melchizedek, the king of righteousness, who Abraham came to and paid his 10% to, or he gave 1/10 of all that he had to that Melchizedek. That Melchizedek, or Shem, killed Nimrod in battle, and Nimrod's body was cut up into many pieces, and his body was distributed throughout the land to the farthest corners of the land, as a warning to the people that this is what happens to wicked people. This is what happens to wicked rulers, wicked kings, wicked leaders who lead the people into wickedness, to their destruction. But what happened was the queen, Semiramis, she wasn't willing to let go of her husband's prestige and power, and she wasn't willing to let go of the throne so easily. So what she did is she actually went throughout the whole land, or she sent people to go throughout the whole land and gather up all the body parts of her husband Nimrod. And as the records state, there was one body part that she was not able to recover, and that was the penis. That was the male reproductive organ, the penis and testicles, that she could not recover, she could not find. Wherever that ended up, who knows, but she couldn't recover it. So she began to have the priests and prophets of her pagan religion begin to erect these obelisks, these Asherah poles, and that's where it started. And she proclaimed throughout the whole land that her husband Nimrod, he didn't really die. what happened was he was so righteous that he ascended into heaven to become the sun god, to become Baal, the sun god. And then she, Semiramis, she later dies, and then the people, the priests and prophets, they make her to be Ishtar, Ashtarte, Asherah, Asheroth, Easter. That's where it all goes back to, my friends. All the paganism of this world, modern day paganism, in Christmas, Easter, all of these, pagan celebrations, it really all goes back to the Tower of Babel. It goes back to Nimrod. It goes back to Semiramis and the son of Semiramis, Tammuz. That's where it all goes back to. If you would like additional context, again, about the particular subject of Asherah poles, obelisks, I again would invite you to go back and watch that first video of Jeremiah, Intro to Jeremiah. It's all about the context, because we will be discussing that subject today, chapter 10, verses 1 through 5. Let's get right into this, my friends. Let's get right into this. And let's start with a word of prayer to our Father. And if you would join me, my dear friends, that would be deeply appreciated. Thank you so much. Our dearest Father in heaven, most holy God, YeHoVaH, we lift up our voices, Father. We lift up our voices, our hearts, and our minds to you. We thank you so much, Father, for your word. We thank you for the inspired words of inspired men throughout world history, that they have recorded, faithfully recorded, your word and your truth, and that has been faithfully passed down to us, that we in this day, in the 21st century, might have the truth before us to lead and guide us back to you. We thank you especially for your Son, Yeshua, that through him, it is possible that we are able to return to you, return to your presence. We thank you, Father, for your Spirit, which comforts us, which guides us, which warns us and protects us. We ask, Father, for your Spirit to be with us. We ask that we can be holy in our hearts, that we can keep the spirit of the law, that we can worship you, Father, in spirit and in truth, as your Son Yeshua told us that we must do. Dearest Father, I ask for a special blessing to be upon me at this time. I'm just getting into this sickness, which has really been affecting my wife over this last week. And my voice right now is failing me. Just one of the weaknesses of the flesh. I ask, Father, for your voice to be with me. I ask that you, Father, you speak tonight, and that your word is spoken, that you fill me with your Spirit, that I can be I pray that I can be a worthy temple that can house your Spirit, and that you will sustain me, Father, through this teaching. I pray for all those who are watching, that they will receive of your word and your truth, and that they, in their own spheres of influence, they can be a light to the world, and they can share your word and truth with those around them. This we pray in the name of your Son, Yeshua Messiah. Amen. Thank you, my dear friends. Thank you so much for joining us, or joining me in that prayer. Please, if you would turn to Jeremiah chapter 9, we will get right into this with verse 12. Starting with verse 3 of chapter 9 is the words of our Father YeHoVaH, where he is talking about the wickedness of the people, their tongues. The people have taught themselves to speak lies. Their tongues speak deceit. Verse 10, Jeremiah comes back with his lamenting. He's lamenting for the land and the consequences for the people's wickedness, that destruction which will come upon them. YeHoVaH, he comes back in verse 11. And he declares, I will make Jerusalem a heap of ruins, a den of jackals. Tanim, that was of course the subject of, verse 11 was the subject of last week's teaching. A den of jackals. Tanim, not tanin, tanim, with an M. This is again YeHoVaH speaking, I will make the cities of Judah desolate, without an inhabitant. Verse 12. Who is the wise man who may understand this? And who is he to whom the mouth of YeHoVaH has spoken, that he may declare it? Why does the land perish and burn up like a wilderness, so that no one can pass through? Destruction is going to come upon the people. Again, we talked about this in the last video. Jeremiah chapter 9, most likely this is roughly 609 BC. The destruction has not yet happened. It's still 20 plus years away. But it's going to happen if the people don't repent. It's an absolute guarantee it's going to happen. Jeremiah knows this, and of course, YeHoVaH our Father, the God of truth, he knows it's coming. And he says, because of this destruction that's going to come upon the people, and that I will make Jerusalem a heap of ruins, a den of tanim, I will make the cities of Judah desolate without an inhabitant. Who is the wise man who can understand this? He's asking for, he's looking for those people that he's always been looking for. He's looking for those people who will worship him in spirit and in truth. John chapter 4, Yeshua says that the Samaritan woman, those are the people that the Father is seeking, he's looking for. And he's saying right here, destruction is coming because of the wickedness of the people, but where is the wise man who can understand this? Where is that person? Where is he? Throughout all the land of Judah, throughout all of my people, those people who truly understand what's coming, why it's coming, and how such destruction and desolation can be avoided through repentance, through turning from their evil ways, their wicked ways. Where is that person? Where is he? Who is the wise man who may understand this? And who is he to whom the mouth of YeHoVaH has spoken, that he may declare it? There are those people who YeHoVaH has spoken to. Jeremiah is one of them, and there are others in the same time period. You have Daniel and Ezekiel. They're not right at this time period because they are actually in Babylon after the captivity. You have Daniel and Ezekiel, but you also have Nahum, you have Zephaniah, you have Lehi. There are examples of wise men who do understand this. They understand what's coming, why it's coming, and they also understand how it can be avoided. And they call out to the people. Jeremiah, for 40 years, that was the length of his ministry, 626 BC to 586 BC, 40-year period. He's constantly teaching, preaching, prophesying, telling the people, this is what's coming. If you want if you want to avoid this destruction, if you want to avoid this desolation, if you want to avoid the wrath of God coming upon you, this is what you need to do. You need to turn from your evil ways, and you need to turn back to the true and living God and the keeping of his commandments, his law, the Torah. There are those people who are wise, who do understand this, whom the mouth of YeHoVaH has spoken, and they do declare it. But they are few and far between. They truly are few and far between, because at this period, in the time of Jerusalem, the time of the kingdom of Judah, they are either this close or they already have completely reached that point of they are fully ripened in iniquity. And it's now just a matter of time before destruction comes upon them. Why does the land perish and burn up like a wilderness so that no one can pass through? Because of the wickedness of the people. In fact, verse 13, YeHoVaH explains why. So why does the land perish? Verse 13, and YeHoVaH said, because they have forsaken my law. That's the reason why. Who is the wise man who can understand this? Why does the land perish? Because they have forsaken my law, which I set before them, and have not obeyed my voice, nor walked according to it. They haven't walked according to my law, my voice. They've gone after their own hearts. The heart of man is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked, as recorded in Jeremiah 17. That's what the people have done. They've walked according to the dictates of their own hearts and after the Baals, after the pagan gods. The Hebrew word there is Baalim. The Hebrew, the English translation of Baal or Baalim, is husband or husbands. And that's the relationship that, in God's eyes, that's what it is. If you are serving the gods of this world, if the gods of this world are your gods, then in God, the true God's eyes, then those gods are your husband, your husbands, and you are committing spiritual adultery. That's what idolatry is in the spiritual sense. It is adultery. They have forsaken my law. They've not obeyed my voice. They've not actually walked, done according to my law and my voice. But what they have done is they've walked according to the dictates of their own hearts, again, which is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked, and after the Baalim, the husbands, pagan gods of this world, which their fathers taught them. Therefore, because they've done this, thus says YeHoVaH of hosts, the God of Israel, because they've done this, I will feed them, this people, with wormwood, and give them water of gall to drink. I will scatter them also among the Gentiles, whom neither they nor their fathers have known. And I will send a sword after them until I have consumed them. This was a subject that we touched on in the documentary Leaving Spiritual Babylon about wormwood. But the context in the documentary was not Jeremiah chapter 9. We were discussing Revelation chapter 8, verses 10 through 11, which also uses the word wormwood in the English, but it's from a Greek word. This is obviously Hebrew, the Old Testament. And really, what wormwood is, just to recap, from the documentary, is wormwood from the Hebrew Strong's Concordance 3939 is the Hebrew word la'anah, which means bitter, curse, regarded as poisonous, therefore accursed. And it can be translated as wormwood, it can be translated as poison, it can be translated as bitter or bitterness. The NLT translation is, "O now, and this is what YeHoVaH of heaven's armies, YeHoVaH Sabaoth, YeHoVaH of hosts, the God of Israel says, look, I will feed them with bitterness and give them poison to drink, water of gall," poison, or poisonous waters, wormwood, poison, bitterness. It is a metaphorical image in this sense of what God is going to be doing to the people of Jerusalem, the kingdom of Jeremiah, the kingdom of Judah, excuse me. But in a literal sense, if we were going to be likening the scriptures to ourselves, that's what we always want to do. We liken the word of God to ourselves. We look at this and we say, okay, YeHoVaH fulfilled this prophecy when Nebuchadnezzar comes in and he destroys the kingdom of Judah, he destroys Jerusalem. That's obviously an incredibly bitter consequence of their sins. And the metaphorical image is image of this wormwood or this poisonous plant. It's water of gall, poison, that he has given them to eat and given them to drink. Wormwood to eat, water of gall to drink. And the consequence is, again, he will scatter them among the Gentiles, among the pagan heathen nations. He's going to take them, those who have survived the destruction, he's going to take them into captivity for 70 years in the land of Babylon. But if we liken the Word of God to ourselves, we find that this same context of wormwood, about poison, is used in the latter days in the visions of the book of Revelation. Revelation chapter 8, verses 10 through 11, "And the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon the third part of the rivers, and upon the fountains of water. And the name of the star is called Wormwood. And the third part of the waters became wormwood," or they became bitter, they became poisoned. "And many men died of the waters because they were made bitter." In this sense, wormwood is from the Greek, Strong's Concordance 894, which is absinthos, which is what is intensely bitter, grievous, or bringing on very sad results. And if you look at the context of Revelation chapter 8, 10 through 11, and this star that falls from heaven, which is called wormwood, which is called absinthos, bitter or poisonous, and it falls upon the rivers, makes the rivers poison, and people die from drinking the water because they were made bitter, it's an image of nuclear war in the future. It's an image of if you want to call it World War III, if you want to call it the Great Tribulation, whatever you want to call it, an image of radiation, an image of the sickness that's brought on by radiation poisoning. Wormwood. The Ukrainian word, this was fascinating, this was presented again in the documentary, the Ukrainian word for wormwood is actually the word Chernobyl. Chernobyl, the exact same location, or the word that was used for the nuclear power plant that melted down, and radiation has just been poisoning that area of the world ever since. I'm not saying that Chernobyl is the meltdown of that nuclear power plant is a direct fulfillment of Revelation 8, 10 through 11, but it's just a very, very interesting correlation of how this star that falls from heaven is called wormwood. It's poison, it poisons the rivers, and that there's this sickness, this bitterness, this poison in the land, which many people die from it. And many men died of the waters because the waters, were made bitter. A third part of the waters became wormwood. They became poison. They became water of gall. So again, in this sense, Jeremiah chapter 9, it's this metaphorical image, but we liken it to ourselves, and we find that there is this coming prophecy. There's this prophecy of the end times, the end days, where that same image, but in a literal sense, a actual literal sense, is being used. Radiation, poison, wormwood, waters of gall, waters of poison, and the result of that is men die all over the world because of that sickness, that radiation. But who is the wise man who can understand this? Why did the destruction come upon them? And why is a greater destruction going to come upon the whole world in the future, with the World War III or Great Tribulation, again, whatever you'd like to call it? Why is it going to happen? Because they have forsaken my law, which I set before them, and have not obeyed my voice, nor walked according to it, but they have walked according to the dictates of their own hearts, and after the gods of this world, which their fathers taught them. That is why. That is why it is going to happen. And just as Jeremiah knew with absolute certainty that it was going to happen to his people if they didn't repent, we likewise can know with absolute certainty that if we as the general population, if we continue in our evil ways, if we do not turn from our evil ways, if we don't repent and return to obeying, shemaing to the word and law of our Father, then we likewise can know, again with absolute certainty, that the same destruction that came upon them, it's going to come upon us. It's a guarantee. The method of that destruction, the means of that destruction, is obviously going to be different, but the end result is the same. The end result is destruction. The end result is cities that are made into heaps of ruins, that are made of, they become habitations of jackals and wild animals, dens of Tanim. That the cities of Judah, or the cities of the world, in our case, they'll become desolate, many of which will be without an inhabitant. Who is the wise man who may understand this? There are people nowadays who are like, there's no way that's going to happen. Absolutely not. America is the greatest and most powerful and strongest nation on the face of the planet. No one could possibly do, that to us. And it's like, well, you know what? The people of Judah and the people of Jerusalem were also very, very confident. In fact, that's the message that the false priests and false prophets are continually giving to the people. That the false priests and false prophets are always saying to the people, if you turn to Jeremiah 23, it says, verse 17, they, the false prophets, they continually say to those people who despise YeHoVaH, they despise me, YeHoVaH has said, you shall have peace. You shall have peace. And to everyone who walks according to the dictates of his own heart, they say, no evil shall come upon you. You'll have peace. No evil will come upon you. The sword will not reach you. Everything's going to be just hunky-dory. Everything will be just fine. And one of the prophecies of Paul is that in the time that they say, that the people declare peace and safety, in that time when they're all just eating and drinking and making merry and just, going about, their wicked ways, when they declare peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them. That's the time when they have been lulled away into that carnal security by our common enemy Lucifer. In that time, then sudden destruction comes upon them. And who is the wise man who can understand this? Hopefully, my dear friends, my brothers and sisters, YeHoVaH our Father has opened your eyes and your ears, your spiritual eyes and spiritual ears, that you do understand this. You understand it, and you know that for all those people who follow in these footsteps, in the footsteps of forsaking the law, not obeying the voice of God, and walking according to the dictates of their own hearts and worshiping the gods of this world, the result is going to be destruction. So, I, YeHoVaH, will send a sword after them until I have consumed them. Continuing, verse 17. Thus says YeHoVaH of hosts, consider this, the destruction that's going to be coming upon you, and call for the mourning women, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G, the mourning women, that they may come, and send for skillful wailing women, that they may come. Let them make haste and take up a wailing for us. In many cultures, especially ancient cultures, but even to this day, there are many cultures in Africa, in the Middle East, in Asia, in South America, Central America. There are many cultures that still have, it's basically a profession. There are women who, they've made it their profession to be wailing women, mourning women. That when there's a funeral, when somebody has died, when some calamity, destruction, or some tragedy has befallen any individual or group of people, there are, you can actually hire women to come in and and weep and wail and mourn and howl, for the people. And it's just it's a cultural thing. And it's obviously part of the culture that they had, back in 2,600 years ago in Israel. So call for the mourning women, excuse me, that they may come, and send for skillful wailing women, that they may come. Let them make haste and take up a wailing for us, that our eyes may run with tears, and our eyelids gush with water. For a voice of wailing is heard from Zion. How we are plundered. This is the voice of wailing. What it declares is how we are plundered. We are greatly ashamed because we have forsaken the land covenant, the law of God and the land covenant, the two covenant lands of Israel and America, so closely tied together. We have forsaken the land, and I dare say that's exactly what's happened in America. The American people, in a general rule, have forsaken the land because we have been cast out of our dwellings. Verse 20, yet hear the word of YeHoVaH, O women, and let your ear receive the word of his mouth. Teach your daughters wailing, and everyone her neighbor a lamentation. For death has come through our windows, has entered our palaces, to kill off the children, no longer to be outside, and the young men no longer on the streets. If you're following along, excuse me, if you're following along in the New King James, you'll notice that the phrase no longer to be and no longer are italicized. No longer to be and no longer, they're italicized. According to the context, that is what the translators have inserted in order to make it more, make it flow in the English, make it make sense. So a few additional English translations that word it slightly differently, but it's still accurate to the context. The NIV says, death has climbed in through our windows and has entered our fortresses. It has removed the children from the streets and the young men from the public squares, places of gathering, public squares, town squares. The ESV says, for death has come up into our windows, has entered our palaces, cutting off the children from the streets and the young men from the squares. The NLT says, just the end there, children no longer play in the streets and young men no longer gather in the squares. Now you do have to be, I would say that you have to be careful with the NLT, the New Living Translation, because they are definitely one of the more liberal translations. They definitely have an artist, they take some artistic license, oftentimes with the Hebrew. But I still, when I read that translation, children no longer play in the streets and young men no longer gather in the squares, it struck me as something that we can likewise liken to ourselves, that we liken the Word of God to ourselves in our own lives, in our own situation. First of all, what's this really saying is that the consequences of their sin, that they've forsaken the law, not obeyed the voice of God, walked according to the dictates of their own hearts, but after the gods of this world, the consequence is that these outside places, the town squares, public squares, in the streets where the children and the young people are out there playing, that they're no longer there. The streets become empty. The streets become desolate. That there is, I will make the cities of Judah desolate without an inhabitant. So they become ghost towns, ghost cities. Nobody there. To kill off the children, no longer to be outside, and the young men no longer on the streets. But I do like the NLT, how it says, children no longer play in the streets, and young men no longer gather in the squares, in the public squares. And to liken it to ourselves, what's really struck me is how much America has changed in such a short period of time. Just an incredibly short period of time. And what came to my mind is my own personal childhood, my own experience. And I'm sure that many of you watching, you can relate to this. You can understand where I'm coming from. See, I am a child of the 80s and 90s. I was born in 1984 in Salt Lake City, Utah. And for the first 12 years of my life, I lived in the Sugar House area of the Salt Lake Valley. And it was there that I I went through the public education system. You know, I went through public school, and right there in the Sugar House area, I went through grades 1 through 6 of elementary school. And I just think back to my childhood, and I honestly cannot remember. I can't remember a single time that my parents ever drove me to school in the morning or picked me up from school in the afternoon to take me back home. And we lived a decent distance from the elementary school. We lived about, I would say, a good mile and a half. A good mile and a half from the elementary school. And there I am, just this little kid. You know, we're talking, you know, grade, 1 and 2. I'm, 6, 7 years old. And here I am, early in the morning, every single morning, Monday through Friday. I wake up, I have breakfast, I get my little tiny backpack and whatever, materials I have in there, throw it on my back, and a 6-year-old kid just walks out the front door of his house in Sugar House area of Salt Lake City and walks alone a mile and a half to school. Goes through school, and then once school is over, comes out and walks that same mile and a half back home. I never took the bus as a kid, and while I think it's probably possible that my parents might have taken me, maybe on days when there was a blizzard or something like that, I honestly cannot remember a single time that my parents either drove me to school or picked me up from school. I walked to school and back every single day, Monday through Friday. Now, I just got to say, and that was, let's see, I would have been 6 years old, so that would have been 1990. 1990, early 90s. For those first 6 years, or first 6 grades, I was going through elementary school, so 1990 through about 1996. And I've got to be honest with you, I cannot imagine if I don't live in the Salt Lake Valley anymore. I live out in the country. But if I lived in the Salt Lake Valley, and if I was sending my children to public school, which I wouldn't, I certainly know better, and considering what they teach children in public school, there's much better options than sending your children to public school. You can either find a really good Christian private school, or if you are able, if you know how to do it and you're able, obviously the best way to go is to homeschool your children, to teach your children yourself. But supposing I still lived in the Salt Lake Valley, and supposing I was going to be sending my children to public school, the exact same parameters, the exact same situation, living the exact same distance from the school in the exact same area of Sugar House, Salt Lake Valley, the only difference is that it's a different time period. Instead of 1990, it's 2017. I honestly cannot imagine doing what my parents did and allow my 6-year-old child to early in the morning just walk out the front door in a relatively busy area of Sugar House and walk a mile and a half to the school and just be like totally fine with it. It's like, no way. Absolutely not. I would not even think about doing that. Why? Because just in the last 20 25 years, our world has changed, my friends. It has changed drastically. It has changed so much. So that today, as a result of the wickedness of the people, the wickedness of the land, children no longer play in the streets and young men no longer gather in the squares. When I was a kid, it's like TV, video games. No way. I was outside. And most of the time, my parents had no clue where I was. I just knew when I needed to be home. But I was outside all the time, and a lot of the time I was outside by myself. Not with, groups or anything like that. Just outside. Just walking the streets. There would be many times when I can remember many times as a child, young child, 7, 8, 9 years old, where I would hop on my little bicycle and I would just hit the sidewalk and ride for 3-4 miles by myself, just riding the streets of Salt Lake Valley. This little kid. And it's like, even 25 years ago, that was acceptable. That was okay. That was all right. Yeah, sure. There were still situations where, children did get kidnapped, where children were, molested, where children, had horrible things, happen to them. But they were so rare that you hardly ever heard of them happening. They were very, very rare instances. And yet here we are just 25 years later, where, at least for me, I cannot even imagine doing that with my children, just letting them just roam free like I roam free as a kid. Not because I don't want my children to roam free. I do want them for that. I wish that my children could have, that freedom, that I enjoyed as a child. But again, supposing that I still lived in the Salt Lake Valley and supposing that I was, sending my children to public school, I would not allow them to just go by themselves. I would either take them every single day, or I would make sure that they caught the bus every single day and that they rode the bus home. Just because we live in such a different world, so much more dangerous, so much more wicked, so much more corrupt, that children no longer play in the streets and young men no longer gather in the squares. So we see that before the actual physical destruction comes upon the people as a result of their wickedness, we already see the consequences of wickedness in our own neighborhoods, in our own cities, in our own towns, where because of the wickedness of the people, as parents, we just don't feel comfortable allowing our children to just play in the streets, to just to go off into the public areas or out, outside by themselves without some kind of supervision. Simply because, again, the world has changed. So just a way to liken the scriptures to ourselves. It's just yet another way that we can take the Word of God and we can say, yes, what this verse 21, is literally saying is, because of their sin, or the sins of the people, Nebuchadnezzar, he comes in and he makes the cities of Judah a desolation, a habitation of jackals, and that there are no children or young men outside or in the streets or in the public squares because the city has just been made desolate without an inhabitant. Okay, yes. But we can see an intermediate fulfillment of these prophecies. It's what I like to call them dual layer prophecies, or prophecies that have a partial fulfillment and then a complete fulfillment. An example of this would actually be the feasts and festivals of YeHoVaH. The one that comes to mind, excuse me. Oh, the one that comes to my mind is the Feast of Tabernacles, the Festival of Tabernacles, the third and final feast of the fall, which the full and complete fulfillment of it is an image of Yeshua and his second coming. He's come to the earth. That's on the Day of Trumpets. And then you have the Day of Atonement, which is the earth is burned and cleansed of all its wickedness. And then the Feast of Tabernacles, where Yeshua, with the righteous, they return to the world to inherit the world, they remake the world into a terrestrial paradise. That is the complete and literal and full fulfillment of the Feast of Tabernacles. It has yet to happen. But there was a partial fulfillment of the Feast of Tabernacles 2,000 years ago with the first coming of Yeshua. John, I mentioned this earlier, that John records in chapter 1 of his Gospel that the Word of God, Yeshua, the Son of YeHoVaH, he came, the Word was made flesh, and he tabernacled among us, that he was with us. The full fulfillment is Yeshua's second coming and the millennial reign of Christ, where he will tabernacle with us for a full 1,000 years. But there was a partial fulfillment in his first coming with his mortal ministry. Same thing here. A prophecy of destruction which will have a complete and full fulfillment when the destruction actually comes, but even before the destruction happens, there's a partial fulfillment where children no longer play in the streets and young men no longer gather in the squares as a result of the wickedness of the people. So when I read that, that's just that's just what came to my mind, and it it struck me. It struck me pretty hard. Oh. Excuse me. The voice is struggling a little bit, but I feel the spirit of my Father, and I feel that he will he will sustain me and sustain my voice to the end of this teaching. Let us continue. Jeremiah chapter 9 verse 22. Speak, thus says YeHoVaH. Even the carcasses of men shall fall as refuse on the open field, like cuttings after the harvester, and no one shall gather them. And then we come to verse 23 and verse 24. Oh, I've got to tell you, verses 23 and 24, pull out a pen, pull out a highlighter, pull out your notebook, pull out your journal, pull out whatever you need to do, highlight this, mark this, circle this, bracket this, make a note of this, do whatever you need to do to take these words of Jeremiah chapter 9 verses 23 and 24 and get them off the page of these books, off the page here, and get it into here, Verses 23 through 24 of Jeremiah chapter 9, these are verses you need to internalize and remember for your entire life. Just internalize them, memorize them, and they're so powerful, so incredibly powerful. Verse 23, thus says YeHoVaH, let not the wise man glory in his wisdom. Let not the mighty man glory in his might. Nor let the rich man glory in his riches. Okay? It's not about relying on your own wisdom. It's not relying on your own strength, your own might. It's not relying on your material goods, your riches. It has nothing to do with any of that. Do not boast in those things. Do not glory in those things. Do not rely on those things. Verse 24, but let him who glories glory in this, that he understands and knows me, that I am YeHoVaH, exercising loving kindness, judgment, and righteousness in the earth. For in these I delight, says YeHoVaH. Oh, yes. Yes. Truly, just such powerful, such wonderful, scripture. This is, if you really think about it, verses 23 and 24. I hadn't found these two verses at the time that I created the documentary. The time is now leaving spiritual Babylon. But I really, really wish I had, because these two verses, 23 and 24 of Jeremiah 9, are the summation of part 2 of the documentary. If you've seen the documentary, you may remember that part 2 was about the importance of spiritual preparation for the Great Tribulation. And that spiritual preparation is infinitely more important than physical preparation. I've never said that physical preparation is not important. I believe it is important, very important. Please, get your food storage together, get a water storage together, get medical supplies, provisions. That's all wonderful. But if you are not spiritually prepared for what's coming, well then any and all physical preparations you will have made are meaningless, worthless. If you are relying upon those physical preparations to save you, to preserve you through the coming destruction, and if you have not spiritually prepared ahead of time, all those physical preparations are meaningless, worthless. They have no value, and they do not have the power to save you, to preserve your life. So let not the wise man glory in his wisdom, in his own wisdom, in his own intelligence. Let not the mighty man glory in his might, in his strength, nor let the rich man glory in his riches. All of these things of the world, that's not where true wisdom, true strength, and true provision comes from. That stuff, it's as a vapor that it's so fleeting, and it's here one moment and it's gone. Do not glory in these things. Do not boast in these things. Do not rely upon these things. But if you are going to boast or glory in anything, in something, remember the words of Ammon from the Book of Mormon. He says, I do not boast of myself, but I boast in my God. Let him who glories glory in this, that he understands and knows me, that I am YeHoVaH, exercising loving kindness, judgment, and righteousness in the earth. For in these, loving kindness, judgment, and righteousness, in these I delight, says YeHoVaH. Oh, and what does it mean, my brothers and sisters, to truly understand and know YeHoVaH? We have gone over this many, many times throughout Jeremiah, and it's so much more than just in Jeremiah. This is in every book of the Old Testament. This is throughout the New Testament. The real test is whether you are shema'ing, listening and obeying, keeping the commandments of God. One of the most clear examples of that would be from, from 1 John chapter 2, verses 3 through 6, which says, Now by this we know that we know him, if we keep his commandments. He who says, I know him, but does not keep his commandments, is a liar, and the truth is not in him. But whoever keeps his word, truly the love of God, truly the love of God is perfected in him. By this we know that we are in him. He who says he abides in him ought himself also to walk just as he walked. If you say that you know God the Father, if you say that you know the Son, Yeshua Messiah, but you do not keep their commandments, then you're a liar. Now, that doesn't mean that I mean, we all slip up, we all make mistakes, we all sin from time to time. But it's a totally different image between slipping up and getting back up and repenting and keep going, keep walking, keep striving, and somebody who is continually rejecting the truth, continually is having multiple opportunities to learn the truth, to come to know the true and living God, and to keep His word, to obey His word. But for whatever reason, the philosophies of men, the traditions of the fathers, false doctrines, or just plain old stubbornness and pride, for whatever reason, that individual is rejecting it, or he's turning aside from it, and he's staying in his own ways, walking in his own path. That would be somebody, if he is saying, I know God, and I know Jesus Christ, but he's not keeping the commandments, that person is a liar, and the truth is not in him. Oh, can we just read this one more time, my friends? It is so wonderful. Thus says YeHoVaH, let not the wise man glory in his wisdom, let not the mighty man glory in his might, nor let the rich man glory in his riches, but let him who glories glory in this, that he understands and knows me, that I am YeHoVaH, exercising loving kindness, judgment, and righteousness in the earth. For in these I delight. In these I love these things, says YeHoVaH. Excuse me. All right, let's keep going. Verse 25 and 26. All about the spirit of the law, which says, behold, the days are coming, says YeHoVaH, that I will punish all who are circumcised with the uncircumcised. Egypt, Judah, Edom, the people of Ammon, Moab, and all who are in the farthest corners who dwell in the wilderness. For all these nations are uncircumcised, and all the house of Israel are uncircumcised in the heart. This is a subject that we've hit on multiple times before. The letter of the law is that physical circumcision. The spirit of the law is all about this. It's always been about this. Always, always, always. People end up trusting in physical ordinances for their salvation, thinking that somehow protects them, saves them, purifies them, cleanses them, whatever it may be. It's not about that. It's about the spirit of it. It is about circumcising this, the heart. Now, when I read this in preparation for this teaching, what struck me is that in verse 26, Judah is listed among the nations that are uncircumcised. Egypt, Judah, Edom, the people of Ammon, and Moab, and all who are in the farthest corners who dwell in the wilderness. Judah, the kingdom of Judah, Jerusalem, is listed as a nation that is uncircumcised. So that kind of, confused me, because I was under the understanding that, wait a minute, I thought, Judah was they were at least doing the outward performances and ordinances of the law. It's the spirit of the law that they weren't keeping, but I thought that they were, keeping the performances and ordinances. So did a little more research into this, and the Hebrew, for 25 and 26, the Hebrew language, as it turns out, both the King James and New King James, it's not really an accurate depiction of what the Hebrew is really saying. Because what it's really saying is that right from verse 25, it's talking about, well, the best way to really discuss it is just to read these other translations, and they become, the truth is, so obvious if you just read these. So the NIV says, "The days are coming, declares YeHoVaH, when I will punish all who are circumcised only in the flesh. Egypt, Judah, Edom, Ammon, Moab, and all who live in the wilderness and distant places, for all these nations are really uncircumcised, and even the whole house of Israel is uncircumcised in heart. When I will punish all who are circumcised only in the flesh. When I will punish all those who are circumcised in body, but not in spirit. I will punish all those who are circumcised merely in the flesh." Behold the day, this is the New American Standard Bible, says, "Behold the days are coming, declares YeHoVaH, that I will punish all who are circumcised and yet uncircumcised." Right there in verse 25, it's talking about the spirit of the law. And what I found to be so interesting is that what this is saying is that even these pagan nations of Egypt and Edom and Ammon and Moab and all who are in the farthest corners who dwell in the wilderness, these were pagan nations who, for whatever reason, were also they were physically circumcising their male children, just like Judah. They are circumcised in the flesh. They are circumcised, yet they are uncircumcised in the heart, in the spirit. And I really feel that the great evidence for that, or reason to believe that, aside from there is some archaeological evidence in hieroglyphic depictions, etc., etc., I really think that the best evidence to really, say that yes, that you can say that even these pagan nations like Egypt, they were practicing this physical circumcision like the house of Israel, is that we know from Genesis that Abraham, Genesis chapter 17, is when YeHoVaH reveals this physical ordinance to Father Abraham. And then what happens with Abraham? He does go to Egypt with his wife Sarah. He goes to Egypt, and he dwells in Egypt for a great period of time. And not just Abraham, but of course, at the time of Joseph in Egypt, we have 430 years of the Israelites dwelling in Egypt. Guess what they're going to be doing for those 430 years? They, even though they, as a people, the truth was not among them all the time, simply because they did not have prophets like Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob, or Joseph leading them, or especially, Moses, who comes later. They had not yet gone to Mount Sinai, where the law of God was completely revealed and to the people. They at least had that physical ordinance given to Abraham, and they had, certain aspects of the truth. They had that physical ordinance of circumcision among them, and they were in Egypt for 430 years. That is a custom, it is a physical ordinance that was passed on to these pagan nations. And here is the God of truth saying, again, in the Hebrew, it clarifies that they are circumcised, but they are not really circumcised. They're circumcised in the flesh, but not in the spirit. And he says that all these nations are uncircumcised. Really, they're uncircumcised in the spirit. And all the house of Israel, the whole house of Israel, are likewise uncircumcised in the heart. They're uncircumcised in the spirit. And that, of course, is what it's always been about. Deuteronomy, and again, these examples, Deuteronomy 10, 16 through 21, Deuteronomy 30, 5 through 6. Those two are directly from the Torah, from the 5 books of Moses. And then we have Jeremiah 4, 3 through 4. And then we're also going to read Romans 2, 11 through 29. But these first 3, right from the Old Testament time period, where, yes, they have these physical ordinances, blood sacrifice ordinances, blood ordinances, but the spirit of the law is plainly obvious and has always been there. It's eternal. Deuteronomy 10, 16 through 21 says, "Circumcise the foreskin of your heart, and be stiff-necked no longer. For YeHoVaH your God is God of gods and Lord of lords." God of gods, lowercase. It's that He is the one true God. He is the one true God. He is the great God, mighty and awesome, who shows no partiality nor takes a bribe. I love that. He shows no partiality, meaning He's not a respecter of persons or nations in any way. He administers justice for the fatherless and the widow, and He loves the stranger. The stranger would be the Gentiles, the nations that are not they were not given, the covenant originally, but that house of Israel that was given, the responsibility of the covenant. It really is a responsibility. The responsibility being that you are to bless all the nations of the earth with the word, with the truth. YeHoVaH says that those people who are outside of the covenant, but are brought in spiritually, are adopted into the house of Israel spiritually to become the spiritual seed of Abraham, He says, He loves the stranger, giving him food and clothing. Therefore, you love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You shall fear YeHoVaH your God. You shall serve Him, and to Him you shall hold fast and take oaths in His name. He is your praise, and He is your God, who has done for you these great and awesome things which your eyes have seen. Again, circumcise the foreskin of your heart, and be stiff-necked no longer. Deuteronomy 30, 5 through 6. Then YeHoVaH your God will bring you into the land which your fathers possessed, and you shall possess it. He will prosper you and multiply you more than your fathers. And YeHoVaH your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your descendants, to love YeHoVaH your God with all your heart and with all your soul, that you may live. That you may live physically, that you may have that abundant life that Yeshua promised, that He does bring and He does deliver on His promises, but that you also may live spiritually, that you may have that gift of eternal life. And it all comes back to circumcising your heart and loving YeHoVaH your God with all your heart and with all your soul, which is to do what? How do you show your love for God? You keep His commandments. Yeshua said it best when He said, if you love me, then keep my commandments. Jeremiah 4, 3 through 4. For thus says YeHoVaH to the men of Judah and Jerusalem, break up your fallow ground, unplowed ground, and do not sow among thorns, sow seeds among thorns. So here we have the word of YeHoVaH the Father, and He's talking about sowing seeds, and not to sow them in hard ground or to sow them among thorns. Here we have Yeshua the Son, who comes in the meridian of time, and He gives parables to the people like the sower and the seed parable. where he talks about hard ground, and he talks about seed that falls among thorns. Yeshua really is he just continually and only speaks the words of his Father. That's what he does. Yeshua says, at one point of his ministry, he says, all I can do is what I have seen the Father do. That's all I can do. And for the first 4,000 years of this world's history, it's the Father. It's the Father, it's the Father, it's the Father. YeHoVaH the Father. His name, his holy and righteous name, recorded nearly 7,000 times in the 39 books of the Old Testament. In the Hebrew Scriptures, nearly 7,000 times. And Yeshua comes the meridian of time, and he's like, I'm just saying what my Father has said, and I'm just doing what my Father does. I'm showing you the love that if you have seen me, he says to Philip, he says, if you have seen me, you've seen the Father. In the sense that I am one with the Father. I'm united with him in all things. That I say the same words that the Father says. I love with the same love that the Father has. I forgive with the same forgiveness and mercy that the Father forgives. And I also judge with the same righteous judgment that the Father has. And yes, upon the evil and the wicked, I have the same wrath, the same righteous wrath that my Father has. I am one with the Father in all things. YeHoVaH says to the men of Judah and Jerusalem, break up your fallow or unplowed ground, and do not sow among thorns. Circumcise yourselves to YeHoVaH, and take away the foreskins of your hearts, you men of Judah and inhabitants of Jerusalem, lest my fury come forth like fire and burn so that no one can quench it because of the evil of your doings. Always been about the Spirit. Always, always, always. And this is something that Paul clearly talks about in Romans chapter 2, verses 11 through 29. In verse 11, he starts out by saying, there is no partiality with God. Basically quoting, he's quoting right there from Deuteronomy chapter 10, that the great God, mighty and awesome, shows no partiality. So Paul says, there is no partiality with God. For as many as have sinned without law will also perish without law, and as many as have sinned in the law will be judged by the law. For not the hearers of the law are just or righteous in the sight of God, but the doers of the law will be justified. Yeshua says the exact same thing in the Sermon on the Mount. Those who hear my words and does them, the person that hears it and does it, is like a wise man who builds his house upon a rock. And that house, with all the wind and rain and floods, guess what? That house is strong and it's stable and it's not going anywhere. But he who hears my words and does not do them, he's a foolish man, and he builds his house on the sand. And when the rains come and the winds and the floods, guess what? That house is going to fall, and great is going to be the fall of it. Not the hearers of the law are just or righteous in the sight of God, but the doers of the law will be justified. For when Gentiles, the Hebrew word is goyim, which is always, it's denoting those who are outside the house of Israel. For when Gentiles who do not have the law, by nature do the things in the law, these Gentiles, although they do not have the law, they are a law to themselves, who show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and between themselves their thoughts accusing or else excusing them, in the day when God will judge the secrets of men by Jesus Christ according to the gospel, according to my gospel. When Gentiles who do not have the law, they end up doing or living the way that God has always intended and desired for His children to live. They live righteous lives, that they have circumcised the foreskin of their hearts, that they are filled with love and kindness and generosity and forgiveness and mercy, and they love the truth, and they're honest, and they are not they're not filled with hate. They're not murderers in the spirit. That's what Yeshua calls it. That if you hate your brothers and your sisters, well, then you're a murderer in your heart. People who they're not, adulterers, physically, but they're also not adulterers in the heart. Gentiles who by nature do the things in the law, these, although not having the law, they are a law to themselves, who show the work of the law written in their hearts. Indeed, you, this is his audience that he's addressing. He's addressing the Jews that were living in Rome. Indeed, you are called a Jew and rest on the law and make your boast in God and know His will. You know His will because you have His word right here in front of you. It's quite obvious that you know what He wants, because He says, this is what I want, this is what I love, this is what I don't love. So you are called a Jew and rest on the law and make your boast in God and know His will and approve the things that are excellent, being instructed out of the law, and are confident that you yourself are a guide to the blind, a light to those who are in darkness, an instructor of the foolish, a teacher of babes, having the form of knowledge and truth in the law. You therefore who teach another, do you not teach yourself? You who preach that a man should not steal, do you steal? You who say, do not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? You who make your boast in the law, do you dishonor God through breaking the law? For, quote, the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you, end quote, as it is written. He's quoting there from Isaiah 52, verse 5, and Ezekiel 36, verse 22, that the name of God, the name of YeHoVaH, is blasphemed among the Gentile peoples, the heathen nations. Why? Because of you, because the people of God, you have been given the commandments, you have been given the scriptures, you've been given the law, and yet, do you keep the law? Do you actually live the way that God desires for you to live? Do you do the things that God desires for you to do? Do you worship the Father in spirit and in truth? The name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you, because of your wickedness. These Gentiles, you're not upholding your end of the bargain. The end of the bargain is that God is going to bless you, He's going to prosper you, He's going to give you a land, a promised land that's flowing with milk and honey. And what He requires of you is to keep the law and to bless all the nations of the earth with the word and with the truth. But because you guys are not doing what you're supposed to be doing, guess what? The Gentiles, they have no reason to, you're not a light to them. You're not a city that's set on a hill that cannot be hid. You're not a candle that is set on a candlestick that gives light to all that are in the house, the Gentiles end up blaspheming the name of God, the true God, YeHoVaH, because of your wickedness. And then he goes into the subject of circumcision, physical circumcision. He says, "For circumcision is indeed profitable if you keep the law. But if you are a breaker of the law," in that, again, you are not living it the way Yeshua showed us how to live it. Again, he's the perfect example. He came and he showed us the path to walk, a path of perfect righteousness. We are obviously going to stumble. I've said this many times. We have all sinned. We have all fallen short of the glory of God. But we strive. We try. We are always relying on the grace of God to keep us or get us back up on our feet, and we keep walking that straight and narrow path. But he says, circumcision is indeed profitable if you keep the law. But if you are a breaker of the law, your circumcision has become uncircumcision. Your physical circumcision is worthless because you are not circumcised in the heart, in the spirit. Your circumcision has become uncircumcision. Therefore, if an uncircumcised man keeps the righteous requirements of the law, okay, so if you have a Gentile, you have an uncircumcised man, but he keeps the righteous requirements of the law in that he is full of love, patience, goodness, faithfulness. He loves the truth. He's honest, kind, giving, charitable. He is just a righteous man, but he's not circumcised in the flesh. Therefore, if an uncircumcised man, uncircumcised in the flesh, keeps the righteous requirements of the law, will not his uncircumcision in the flesh be counted as circumcision in the spirit? Paul, you got to be really, really careful with Paul because he is difficult to understand. He is very difficult. Even Peter acknowledges that. In 2 Peter chapter 3, Peter says that Paul has written the truth, but he is difficult to understand. Peter, 2,000 years ago, a fellow Jew, so he's from the same culture and background, and he understands these things, and he has a very very grasp on the Torah and the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures. Peter is saying Paul's difficult to get. He's really difficult to understand. And then he goes on and he says, and there are many people that are unlearned and unstable who twist and distort his words, Paul's words, and the other scriptures, the other, the Old Testament, Word of God. They wrest it, they twist it, they distort it to their own destruction. So we got to be very, very careful with Paul. But what Paul is saying is that physical circumcision in and of itself is meaningless. It's worthless if you're not actually circumcised in the spirit, in the heart, the way that God is always intended and always desired. And that if somebody is uncircumcised in the flesh, but they are circumcised in the spirit, won't their uncircumcision be counted as circumcision? In other words, it's that it's okay. It's not that, this physical ordinance, again, it doesn't save you. It doesn't purify you or cleanse you. And I can say the exact same thing about the physical ordinance of baptism. Baptism is indeed profitable. It's wonderful. Baptism is indeed profitable if you keep the law. But if you are a breaker of the law, your baptism has become unbaptism. You get what I'm saying? I hope you follow along with me. Your circumcision has become uncircumcision if you just are doing these ordinances, the letter of the law by itself, and you're not actually doing what God has always intended, always desired for you to do, well then it's, in and of itself, it's meaningless. And then he goes on and he says, and will not the physically uncircumcised in the flesh, if he fulfills the law, judge you who, even with your written code and circumcision, are a transgressor of the law. So there are people who what Paul's saying is, there are people who are uncircumcised in the flesh, but they're circumcised in the spirit. And guess what? Many of them who are circumcised in the spirit but not in the flesh, they're going to end up judging you guys who are circumcised in the flesh but not in the spirit. And then he goes on and he says, for he is not a Jew, or he is not of the house of Israel, the covenant house, who is one outwardly, nor is circumcision that which is outward in the flesh. But he is a Jew, or he is of the house of Israel, the covenant house of Israel, who is one inwardly. And circumcision is that of the heart, in the spirit, and not in the letter, whose praise is not from men, but from God. But then he brings it, right back to what he said earlier. But what advantage then has the Jew, or what is the profit of circumcision? Much in every way. It is profitable, chiefly because to them, the house of Israel, were committed the oracles of God. The oracles, and the Greek word here is Strong's Concordance 3051, which is Logan. It's from the root word logos, which means word. Logion, which is divine communication, divine responses or utterances, a divine declaration, a statement originating from God, which can include, this is straight from Strong's Concordance, which can include the entire Old Testament. The entire Old Testament can be referred to as the Logion, which are the logos of God. It is His Word, it is His oracles, and it was committed to the house of Israel, those oracles, those divine communications, the Word of God. Circumcision is indeed profitable if you keep the law. Baptism is indeed profitable if you keep the law. That's what it's all about. And so we're going to come back to that subject of letter versus the spirit of the law. But first, what we're going to do is we're going to continue into chapter 10, verses 1 through 5, and then we will come back to that same line of thinking, that same line of thought here. Verse 1, chapter 10. Hear, Hebrew word, Shema. That's what it is. Shema, the word which YeHoVaH speaks to you, O house of Israel. Thus says YeHoVaH, do not learn the way of the Gentiles. As I mentioned earlier, it's the Hebrew word goyim, Strong's Concordance 1471. And goyim can be translated in multiple different ways. It can be translated as Gentiles. It can be translated as nations, as in the nations of the earth, nations of the world. And it can also be translated as heathens, those who are outside the covenant. So the New King James is, thus says YeHoVaH, do not learn the way of the Gentiles. If you're following along in the King James, it says, thus says YeHoVaH, learn not the way of the heathen. The NIV says, do not learn the ways of the nations. And he says, Do not be dismayed at the signs of heaven. For the Gentiles, the heathens, the nations of the world are dismayed at them. Dismayed. The NIV is terrified. So, do not learn the ways of the nations, the heathen, Gentiles, nations, the people of the world, or be terrified by signs in the heavens, because although Gentiles, heathen nations, are terrified by them. There have always been signs in the heavens, always, and there are still signs in the heavens. In fact, this year, coming up on September 23rd, if I remember correctly, September 23rd, 2017, is what I presented in the documentary Leaving Spiritual Babylon, what I believe to be a fulfillment, whether it's another partial fulfillment, because I know that there was a partial fulfillment of it at the time Yeshua was born, whether this is the literal, full, complete fulfillment, coming up this September 23rd, 2017. But there are just amazing signs in the heavens, and not just in September, but in the month previous, in August. There is a solar eclipse, a complete solar eclipse that will be passing across the entire length of the United States of America, coming to a full, complete 100% eclipse right there over the heartland of America, over the Promised Land. And then 1 month later, September 23rd, 2017, is the Revelation 12 sign, where you have Virgo, and you have Jupiter that's been within Virgo for 42 weeks. It passes out of her, and you got the moon at her feet. You have the sun inside of Virgo. She's clothed with the sun. And then you have the 9 stars of Leo, the lion, above her head, with the 3 additional planets of Mercury, Venus, and Mars. 12 stars above her head, clothed with the sun, moon at her feet, and giving birth, if you will, to the king star, Jupiter. All that information can be found by watching part 1 of the documentary Leaving Spiritual Babylon. Tremendous signs in the heavens, tremendous signs of the heavens. And whether it means that the Great Tribulation is right around the corner, or whether it means it's still, several years away, I don't know. I don't know. But what I do know is that what YeHoVaH our Father has said to us, what He has said to the house of Israel, and we need to be a part of the house of Israel, spiritually adopted into that house, is that do not learn the way of the Gentiles, and don't be terrified or dismayed at the signs in the heavens. For the Gentiles, they're terrified of them, they're dismayed by them. But that first one is the most important. Do not learn the way of the Gentiles. This is YeHoVaH really stating what He stated earlier in the Torah, Deuteronomy chapter 12. You can turn there, or you can just do just a little cross-reference note in the margin if you so desire. And he says here in chapter 12 of Deuteronomy, starting in verse 29, it says, "When YeHoVaH your God cuts off from before you the nations, the Goyim, the Gentiles, the heathens, which you go to dispossess, and you displace them and dwell in their land, take heed to yourself that you are not ensnared to follow them after they are destroyed from before you, that you do not inquire after their gods, saying, how did these nations serve their gods? I also will do likewise. You shall not worship YeHoVaH your God in that way. For every abomination to YeHoVaH which He hates, they have done to their gods, to their Elohim. for they burn even their sons and daughters in the fire to their gods. Whatever I command you, be careful to observe it. You shall not add to it, nor take away from it. So here's YeHoVaH, and he's just going right back to Deuteronomy chapter 12, and he's saying, do not learn the way of the Gentiles. And then we keep reading verses 3 through 5, where we get the context of what he is specifically referring to when he says, do not learn the way of the Gentiles. Verse 3, for the customs, the traditions of the peoples are futile, worthless, vain, meaningless, of no profit to them, no benefit to them. For one cuts a tree from the forest, the work of the hands of the workmen with the axe. They decorate it, that tree they've cut from the forest, they decorate it with silver and gold. Silver and gold, silver and gold. Not exactly, don't really have a singing voice right now, but you get the idea. They decorate it with silver and gold. They fasten it with nails and hammers, so that it will not topple. These trees that they've cut down from the forest and they've decorated with silver and gold, they are upright, like a palm tree, and they cannot speak. They must be carried, because they cannot go by themselves. Do not be, again, speaking to the house of Israel, do not be afraid of them, of these gods, for they cannot do evil, nor can they do any good. They're just wood. They're just figments of the people's imagination. They don't really exist. What verses 1 through 5 is really specifically referring to is, as we mentioned at the beginning of this video, it's the Asherah poles. It's the wooden idols. It is the phallic symbols that the pagans would have erected on just about every hilltop, on every high place. And it was there that they would have the temples of Ishtar, or the shrines of Ishtar, where they would go and they would perform their sunrise morning services, and they would worship Baal, the sun god, and they would and they would participate in all this paganism and all of this, stuff of the heathen nations. Do not, and YeHoVaH said specifically, do not learn the way of the Gentiles. But how these Asherah poles have found or have slithered, I'm going to use a word that really denotes something cunning and crafty, just as Satan really is, how these Asherah poles have slithered their way and slunk their way into the homes of most Christian people around the world, is in the form of the Christmas tree. The Christmas tree, which the star on top of the Christmas tree, that's actually not a star at all. At least anciently, that's not what that image was. Now, you would ask any Christian, it's like, what does that star represent on top of the Christmas tree? Oh, well, that's clearly the Star of Bethlehem, and it's all about Jesus, and it reminds us of Jesus. And these candy canes these are shepherd's crooks, and all these decorations, it's all about Jesus. Well, actually, no, it's not. The Christmas tree is a phallic symbol. It is the phallic symbol of Baal. It is the phallic symbol of Nimrod. The star on the top is not a star, it's actually a sun, in representation of the sun god. And things like candy canes, it's not a shepherd's crook, it's actually what's called a crozier. A crozier was, if you've seen depictions of Pharaoh of Egypt in hieroglyphics or images, he's using he has this crook-like staff. And it was a symbol of pagan authority or pagan power. And what the crozier really is, it's a serpent. It's a snake. So you have all of these things that Christians have, because we've just inherited these things, which again, it goes back to what YeHoVaH was saying in verse 14. They have walked according to the dictates of their own hearts and after the Baals, the gods of this world, which their fathers taught them. These are the lies of the fathers, the traditions of the fathers that have just been handed down, generation after generation. But these are the things that YeHoVaH has said, do not learn the way of the Gentiles. Don't learn what they do. Don't learn how they do it. Don't inquire after them, saying, how did these nations serve their gods? How did they do it? I'm going to do the same stuff, and I'm going to do it for the true God. Don't do it. It's an abomination in the eyes of our Father. He hates it. It is not something that He delights in. What are those things that YeHoVaH delights in? He delights in loving kindness, judgment, and righteousness in the earth. Righteousness, purity, sanctification. He delights in His people shemaing, obeying His voice, and not forsaking His law. Not forsaking His law, and not walking after the dictates of their own hearts and after the gods of this world. God has always wanted, from the very, very beginning, He's always wanted His people to be a Zion people, a holy nation, a kadosh goyim, holy nation, a nation of kings and priests, kings and priests, queens and priestesses. Excuse me. Again, that's I thank God that He's sustained me and strengthened me thus far. But I'm telling you, this it's going out for sure. You know, that is what God has always wanted. But that result, that end result that we all desire, I desire it, I know you do as well. That result of becoming Zion individuals and a Zion people, a nation, a kadosh nation, will not happen as long as God's people continue to learn the way of the Gentiles. As long as they continue to as long as they continue to inquire after the Gentiles, saying, how do these guys do it? How do they worship their gods? I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do the same stuff. We will never become a Zion people if we continue in that. Now, when I was preparing this lesson, I was thinking to myself, is this, we want to come down with a sledgehammer of justice. We want to come down with a sledgehammer of justice and just slam on this topic of Christmas, that we get this garbage out of our lives. And while that is all true, that we desire, it is my sincerest desire, and I hope it is the desire of your hearts as well, my brothers and sisters, to embrace the truth and get this stuff out of our lives, all of this paganism that we have inherited. And I know that many of you have made that really, massive, very, big decision in your own lives, that yes, you want to walk away from the stuff to get this paganism out of your lives. And I congratulate you and applaud you for that, because it does take courage to, take that step. When we're living amidst spiritual Babylon, it really does take a great amount of courage to leave spiritual Babylon. But that's what we all need to do. We all need to be like Abraham, who he lived in the Ur of the Chaldees. He lived in ancient Babylon, but YeHoVaH spoke to him, called him to come out of that, to come out of the Ur of the Chaldees, and Abraham does. he becomes the first Hebrew. The Hebrew word, the Hebrew word Hebrew literally means to cross over. So Abraham, he leaves the Ur of the Chaldees and he crossed over the Euphrates River, leaving all of that paganism behind, the paganism of his fathers, the paganism of his families, going back generations, and he, with an eye single to the glory of the one true God, he walked, straight into the promised land. And in a spiritual sense, we need to do the same thing. We need to leave this paganism behind, and with an eye single to his glory, walk into that spiritual promised land, which he has promised to all those who love him, to all those who keep his commandments. So, as I was preparing this lesson, I was thinking, is that what I really, really want to hit on, really hard, come down with that hammer of justice? But this very, very clear message, came to me, and it led me off into a slightly different direction. Now, I bring it right back because this is what the Spirit told me to do and is telling me to do now, is that yes, we do desire to become a Zion people, and we will never become that as long as we are clinging to all the paganism that we've inherited from generations past. But this other direction, or this other note that the Spirit put on my heart, goes back to what I was saying 2 weeks ago in the teaching about the tongue, about death and life is in the power of the tongue. And in that teaching, I talked about the difference between making righteous judgments on someone's behavior, or someone's behavior, or someone's actions, and condemning somebody. It's a totally different thing between making a righteous judgment of someone's behavior and actions and condemning them. So, what I thought of, or what came to me, was this example of person A and person B. So, follow me with this. Person A and person B. Person A is a circumcised, baptized, pays his tithing Christian, and he even goes as far to keep the feasts and festivals of YeHoVaH. This is somebody, person A, who is doing all of these things. He's left the paganism of his ancestors. He even keeps the feasts and festivals of YeHoVaH. But person A is also really just a miserable, deplorable person. He is what I like to call, and I've encountered many of these people, he's what I like to call a Torah terrorist. Now, the image of a Torah terrorist is somebody who has very little mercy, very little forgiveness. He's just, it's all about this, it's all about the letter, it's all about doing it exactly just as it says, just in the letter, and there's very little mercy or compassion or forgiveness extended towards anyone who is not at that understanding, does not know that that we need to keep, the law of God. So this person is what I like to call a Torah terrorist. He is full of hate and bitterness. He condemns and despises those who don't keep Torah. He has very little mercy, very little forgiveness, holds grudges forever, and he only loves those who love him. Okay, so that's person A. But again, he's been baptized, and he pays his tithing, and he keeps the feasts and festivals of YeHoVaH. So he's doing all these things. But in the heart, he's this miserable, deplorable person. Now, person B is a Christian man, or just anyone. And he's born and raised in some various denomination, some various faith. He's not circumcised, he was not even baptized. Or let's say he was baptized, but the actual baptism, it wasn't performed exactly how we would say it should be performed and needs to be performed. And he doesn't keep the feasts and festivals of YeHoVaH. But in complete ignorance, because the vast majority of Christians are completely ignorant on these subjects, but in complete ignorance, he celebrates Christmas and Easter, believing with all of his heart that these celebrations, are really all about Jesus Christ. That's what he believes. So, on the outside, you would look at this person, on the outside, person A, you would look at the person and be like, well, he's doing everything right. And person B, he's not doing everything right. But person B inwardly is a loving man, a kind man, a honest man. Person B is merciful. He openly forgives without ever holding any grudges. He is charitable. He's always looking for ways to share his gifts and talents to bless the lives of all those around him. He loves those who love him. Yes, he loves those who love him, but he also loves those who hate him and curse him and persecute him. And he prays for these people, and in other words, person B inwardly is, that he is satisfying, he is living the righteous requirements of the law. Okay, so question is, on Judgment Day, who, person A or person B, is going to be found on the right hand of Yeshua, and who is going to be found on the left hand of Yeshua? My left, not yours. The answer, of course, is obvious. Person A will be found on the left hand, and person B will be found on the right hand. Even though person A outwardly is doing all of these things, inwardly, according to the spirit of the law, he's not keeping it. Person B, outwardly, is not doing these things, but inwardly, he is a genuine, very sincere, good, good, righteous person. This goes back to what Paul was saying. Circumcision is indeed profitable if you keep the law. But if you are a breaker of the law, your circumcision has become uncircumcision. Therefore, if an uncircumcised man, person B, keeps the righteous requirements of the law, will not his uncircumcision be counted as circumcision? And will not the physically uncircumcised, if he fulfills the law, in that he is that truly righteous person inwardly in the heart, if he fulfills the law, judge you, person A, who even with your written code and circumcision are a transgressor of the law. For he is not of the house of Israel, who is one outwardly, nor is circumcision that which is outward in the flesh. But he is of the house of Israel, who is one inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart, in the spirit, not in the letter, whose praise is not from men, but from God. The message that came to me very clearly was, I've encountered several people who, yes, they've walked away from the paganism of Christmas and Easter and all these things, and they are keeping the feasts and festivals of YeHoVaH. But in speaking with some of these people, they really do come across as what I, again, call Torah terrorist, is that they look at people who do celebrate Christmas and Easter, the people, and they condemn the people and say, wow, these people they're just the worst. They are the worst people ever. Going back to what I was saying about righteous judgment versus condemnation. We need to make righteous judgments of people's behaviors and actions. And yes, by the Word of God, we can look at the paganism of Christmas and Easter, and we can say, okay, according to the Word of God, these things are not good. I can judge that. I can judge that these things are really not about Jesus Christ. They are not about God. They are not from Him, but they are from a source of wickedness, of evil. They are from the devil. Ultimately, that is the root of where these things have come from. As all paganism, as all lies, as all heresies, come from Satan, our common enemy. I can judge that behavior, judge that action, and say it's wrong, it's not something I should do, it is not the truth, it is a lie. And as a result, I myself, because I want to show my love for my Father, I'm not going to participate in that stuff. I'm not going to do any of that stuff. And I'm going to do everything I can to teach and share to all these people what these things really are and invite them to walk away from them. But then you come across these people who, again, in their ignorance, Christians by the millions, in complete and total ignorance, they do participate in these things. And they're wrong. They're wrong to participate in these things. There's no question about that. But it's still not our place, our authority, to pass condemnation upon these people. Because we have the ability to look at the outward appearance, but only YeHoVaH, our Father, and only His Son Yeshua, to whom all power and authority in heaven and earth has been given, and all judgment has been given, only they have the ability to look on the heart of their children. We can't do that. We can't look on the heart. So again, going back to the example of person A and person B, person A outwardly might be doing everything he should be doing, but inwardly not circumcised of the heart, not baptized in the Spirit, is bitter and full of hate and very little mercy and compassion and very little forgiveness and holds grudges and all and just is just a bitter person. Person B doesn't do the feasts and festivals, and he's celebrating Christmas and Easter in ignorance, but inwardly keeps the righteous requirements of the law, as Paul says. Will not his uncircumcision be counted as circumcision? Yes, it will. Because ultimately, my friends, it is about this. It is what God is always looking at. He is looking at the heart. What is your real motive? What is going on in here? And it is not our place to pass that kind of judgment that is condemnation, saying that person is going to hell, because we don't know. We don't know the situation, we don't know their background, we don't know their history, we don't know their heart, we don't know their mind, we just don't know. But again, this is the difference between somebody who who transgresses the law out of ignorance and somebody who transgresses the law with full knowledge. There is a big difference. Let's say me, okay? I have spent many years studying these subjects, studying the subjects of Christmas and Easter, the paganism of them, the history of them, and I've studied many years about the feasts and festivals, and I know that God our Father does not want us to be going after this paganism. He wants us to be doing the things He's told us to do. I know that. He does not want us to, again, to go after Christmas and Easter, to worship Him in that way. That's an abomination to Him. He hates these things. He hates the paganism. He loves the loving kindness, judgment, and righteousness in the earth. Those are the things that He delights in. I know that. So if right now, if I just up and decided, you know what, forget it. This whole feast and festival thing is really it's not for me. I'm just not even going to do that. I'm going back to Christmas and Easter. I'm going back to what I was raised with. Oh, now that's a whole different situation. That's a whole different situation. That is not doing these things out of ignorance. That is sinning with open eyes. That's going, I'm just going to reject all the light and truth that God has given me, and I'm just going to go back to spiritual darkness. James chapter 4 verse 17, he says, "To him who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin. To him who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin." I know that this is good. I know that the word is good. And if I do not do it, it is sin, because I know better. I know the truth. To say the exact same thing in another way, you could say, "To him who knows what is evil and does it, to him it is sin." And I know that the paganism of Christmas and Easter is evil. And I know that YeHoVaH has said, do not learn the way of the Gentiles. Don't do these things. This is what they do. Don't follow in their footsteps. Don't do what they do and say that you're doing it for me. There are sins of omission, and then there are sins of commission. Omission is where you know something is good and you don't do it. And a sin of commission is where you know something is bad and you do it. Do you get that? You know something is good and you don't do it, or you know something is good and you don't do it, or you know something is bad and you do it. The two kinds of sins that human beings that we make, and we all make them. Many, many times, hundreds, thousands of times throughout our lifetime. No question about that. But the message that came to me really was from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 1 through 7, about that love that is full of mercy and compassion. That, as Paul goes on later in Romans chapter 3, is where he says, look, we're all in the same boat. We've all sinned, and we've all fallen short of the glory of God. We all need Yeshua. We all need Yeshua. Okay? And in 1 Corinthians 13, 1 through 7, Paul says, "Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love," the true kind of love, charity, the pure love of Christ, which is sacrificial love. It's the Greek word agape. It is a love that bears all things. It is a love that sacrifices for all people. It is the kind of love that lays, no greater love has a man than this, than he lays his life down for his friends. So though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I have become sounding brass or a clanging cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. Nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, but have not love, it profits me nothing. Love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself. It is not puffed up. It does not behave rudely, does not seek its own, is not provoked, thinks no evil. Love does not rejoice in iniquity. It doesn't rejoice in lawlessness, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. Obviously, my dear friends, my brothers and sisters, the message is that because our Father in heaven has told us to, because He's given us His word and His commandments, We strive with all of our heart, with all of our soul, to keep his commandments. That's how we show our love for God. And when he says, do not learn the way of the Gentiles, and he describes clearly this is what they're doing, this is what they're doing. Again, they decorate it with silver and gold. He's saying, don't do this stuff. Don't go after them. Don't do what they do. And we're obviously going to show our love for our fellow men by being a light to the world, by being that candle that is not put under a bushel, but put on a candlestick. And we are going to seek to fulfill our end of the covenant, our end of the bargain, in that we're going to bless all the nations of the world with the word and with the truth, to call all the world back to the one true God. But if we are doing it out of hypocrisy, if we are doing it looking down upon these people who are participating in these pagan celebrations, and we're condemning them and we're saying, oh, they're all going to go to hell and blah, 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 well then, we're nothing. We can have all of these things. We can be doing all of these things. We can on those outward things, we can be keeping the feasts and festivals, and we can be participating in all these physical ordinances and all these performances, and if we are not actually being who we need to be in the heart, well then it's worthless. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. But likewise, on the flip side, those people who know the truth about what Christmas and Easter really are, they know about the paganism of them, they know what the word says, but they continue to celebrate these things anyway, well, that's not sinning out of ignorance. That's willingly sinning. And again, that's something that's totally different. But really, my friends, I hope that we can just be a people that we call people to repentance, but ultimately judgment, that's in his hands. That's in his hands. And we don't condemn. We don't condemn somebody because they may sin differently than we do. Okay. You might sin differently than I do, and I might sin differently than you do, but either way, we're both sinners. We're all sinners, each and every one of us, and we all deserve the punishment of death. That's what the consequence of sin is death. We all deserve it. And I just praise my Father for his mercy, for his loving kindness, his forgiveness. I praise him, and I praise his Son, Yeshua Messiah, that he came and he took that punishment upon himself and just says, look, follow me, learn of me, walk in my footsteps, do what I do, and you will have the gift of eternal life. So, but going back to what I was saying before about Zion, becoming a Zion people, this is what's really important, and this is what is the end goal or the end desire, because we want to be a celestial people. We want that highest degree of celestial glory. So we're going to strive to know the truth, understand the truth, and obey the word of our Father. But when it comes to establishing a Zion people, it cannot be done. It cannot be done as long as this paganism is among us. This sin and wickedness. Even if it's out of ignorance, it can't be done. A kadosh people, a holy nation, a Zion people, where YeHoVaH is our God, and we are his people, where we all dwell in righteousness, where we are all of one heart and one mind. We have his heart, his mind, his spirit is with us, and we all know him, from the least unto the greatest. It does require the keeping of his commandments. And there is something that I can promise you, my friends. There's something I can promise you in conclusion to this teaching. is that during the millennial reign of Yeshua, the Son of the living God, what I can promise you is that no one will be celebrating Christmas and Easter. Nobody. No one during that 1,000-year period is going to be participating in the pagan wickedness of this world. How can I make a statement like that? Well, because the Word declares it. 3 things. YeHoVaH says for us not to learn the ways of the heathen and do not practice the ways they worship their gods. And if you keep my commandments and do what I've told you to do, then I will be your God and you will be my people. 2, as a Zion people during the millennium, we will all live in righteousness and keep the law of God. So that first one was from Jeremiah 10 and Deuteronomy 12. That second one is from Jeremiah 31 and Ezekiel 36. We will all live in righteousness and keep the law of God. That's what it says. That He will give us a new heart and He will write His law upon it, upon our heart, and He will cause us to walk in obedience to His law and His commandments. And number 3, what will be actually practiced during the millennium? The feasts and festivals. And this is from Zechariah chapter 14. Zechariah chapter 14 verses 16 through 19 says, at the very, very least, the Feast of Tabernacles will be kept during the millennium. And it says, and it shall come to pass that everyone who is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem shall go up from year to year to worship the King. To worship the King, YeHoVaH of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. Zechariah 14 is a really awesome scripture to further prove what was taught in our 3-part teaching about the name of God, that following the resurrection of Yeshua, after His resurrection, He has taken the name of His Father upon Himself. That He, like His Father, is now self-existent. He is eternal. That He, post-resurrection, after the resurrection, can be referred to as YeHoVaH. That He is completely one with His Father in all things, and that all power and authority has been given to Him. So it says, and this is the context, during the millennium, they shall go up to Jerusalem year to year to worship the King, YeHoVaH of hosts, to worship the Son, Yeshua, and to worship the Father, YeHoVaH, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. And it shall be that whichever of the families of the earth do not come up to Jerusalem to worship the King, YeHoVaH of hosts, on them there shall be no rain. If the family of Egypt will not come up and enter in, they shall have no rain. They shall receive the plague with which YeHoVaH strikes the nations who do not come up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. This shall be the punishment of Egypt and the punishment of all the nations that do not keep the Feast of Tabernacles. That, my friends, I can tell you is an absolute promise. During the millennium, no one is going to be keeping Christmas or Easter. With a Zion people, a people who are of one heart and one mind, and that one heart and one mind is the heart and mind of God, no one keeps, or no one celebrates in this pagan stuff. The people who do celebrate in it, if it is totally out of ignorance, they have no clue what they're doing, which is, again, something that we honestly cannot know, we don't condemn. We don't say that, these people are going to hell because they celebrate Christmas and Easter, because we simply do not know their hearts. But what we do is we take advantage of every opportunity we have, that when we see somebody, we are a light to the world and we keep the feasts and festivals. And if somebody comes to us and they ask, hey, what is this stuff that you're doing? You tell them. Or if you're given an opportunity and the Spirit puts it on your heart to bear witness and bear testimony of the truth of the Word of God, and to invite in love for these people to walk away from that stuff and to embrace the truth and to keep the feasts as we will be keeping the feasts during the millennium, then that's, what you do. You follow the Spirit. You follow the commandments of God. But there was that that clear message that came to me. It was a message of compassion, of love, of forgiveness, of not condemning these people, because they may sin differently than we sin. We are all sinners, and we've all fallen short of that glory of the eternal God. We all need Yeshua, our Lord. Thank you so much for watching, my friends. I do apologize. I am sorry. This sounds terrible, and you've had to, listen to me, for 2.5 hours now, and I do apologize for the sound of the voice. I'm hoping that I will be, again, I'm just going into this sickness, so I'm hoping that by next week I will be better, but that's really just something that we'll have to wait and see. I just might be worse next week, and if the sickness proves to be, really, really, really a nasty sickness, then if it does come to it, I hope it doesn't, but if it does come to it that we are just not, I won't be able to do a teaching next week, then at the very least I'll make that announcement and inform you and keep you in the loop to let you know what we'll be doing for next week. But if you'd be willing to just remember me and remember our family in your prayers, that would be wonderful. We'd very much appreciate that, and we thank you for that. If you desire, my friends, if you desire to have the name of our Father spoken over you, that His name might be spiritually written upon your minds, upon your foreheads, and upon your hearts, then you may receive it now. YeHoVaH bless you and keep you. YeHoVaH make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. YeHoVaH lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace. In the name of our Lord, Yeshua the Messiah. Amen. Thank you again for watching, and thank you to all those who are supporting us, who are supporting this work and this ministry. If you would like to support us, you would like to help us to accomplish this work so that we can continue to do these teachings each week and continue to get the word of our Father out to the world, then I invite you to please go to patreon.com/YHVH, and you can do so very easily by clicking on this button right here. You'll be sent to our main page, Patreon page. You click on the button that says Become a Patron, and you follow the guidelines and sign up today. Thank you so much, and God bless you all.